Okay, here's the first of the sheets that we're going to work on together today. So this is where they take our number grids, either broken into grids of 100 or grids of 10, like problem number 6 is, and we're going to take what's shaded in and make what fraction that is, and then work on changing that fraction into a decimal. And that's our whole work for today, is changing fractions to decimals. Okay, so here's our key. Don't forget your name, number, date. Tomorrow is today is 4/16/20. I always film these the night before, so that's why I said tomorrow. Okay. All right, so here's our first set of fraction, or our first set of number blocks. So this one's broken into a grid of 100. So I already know from my first question, there's 100 in my denominator because there's 100 of them. How many are shaded in? Now, some people might say, oh, there's one shaded in because it's one long column, which would be true if this grid was broken into what? If it was broken into tens. So 10, 20, 30, 40. If it was just the columns, you'd be right. It'd be 1/10. But this isn't broken into 10. This is broken into hundreds. So how many of these are shaded in for a 100? Well, if 1/10 is shaded in, what's the equivalent fraction for 100? It's 10 hundredths. Now, the cool thing about this is you can actually count the bricks if you weren't sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So our fraction on this one is 10 hundredths. Okay, now here's the big question. From our number talk, we looked at place value for tenths and hundredths. The decimal for any fraction is written exactly how you would say it. So we say this fraction is 10 hundredths. So it's hundredths. So how many spots after the decimal does hundredths always have to be? 2. Hundredths is always 2 after the decimal. And again, if we didn't remember that, we can always pull back out this chart we made. Tenths, hundredths. It's always 2 numbers after the decimal, okay? So how do I write 10 hundredths as a decimal point? As a decimal problem? So just say it. 10 hundredths looks like this. As a decimal, it's 0.10. 10 hundredths. 2 numbers after the decimal point, and we're good and ready to go on. So again, if you're ever wondering how do I write a decimal, say the fraction. However you say the fraction is going to tell you how to write the decimal. 10 hundredths is 10 hundredths, 2 numbers after the decimal. Okay, let's go on to number 2. This time again, I see it's broken into hundreds, so a hundred's going to be my denominator. How many of those hundreds are there? Where there's 2 rows of 10, so 10, 20, there's 20 hundredths as my fraction. How do I write 20 hundredths as a decimal? Well, I start with my decimal. Hundredths is my denominator, so I know hundredths is 2 numbers after the decimal. So my answer is 0.20. That is 20 hundredths. 20 hundredths, 20 hundredths. Okay, moving on. Our third problem is the one that has the blue shading in, all right? I see it's broken into hundreds again, so my denominator is going to be out of 100. Now, I hope you never, ever, ever have to go and count every single one of these boxes. You can if you want to, but you could probably pick a number of different strategies to figure this out. Now, I look at this because I know that there's 10 rows broken into this one. 3 of those 10 rows are blank with no shading. So how many out of 10 are shaded? If 3 are not, that means 7 out of 10 are shaded. So this would actually stand for 70 blocks. Okay, now some people also kind of do the area model. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 10 times 7 is 70. That could also help you out with that. If the bottom line is, I don't really know how to figure out that area model to find how many are shaded for a large amount like that, then count every one of the boxes and you'll get it, okay? Now, my fraction is 70 hundredths. So I know I've got to have 2 numbers after the decimal. 70 hundredths looks like 0.70. That's 70 hundredths. Okay. Now, this one is a little weird. It's got a whole number and it's got another part of another one. So this one's actually going to end up being a mixed number. We're not going to worry about that one for right now. That's for another date, maybe even another year. All right. Go on to number 5. What is the fraction that is shaded here? Well, again, I see that this is a grid of 100, so it's going to be out of 100. Here's 1 row 10, 2 row, or column, sorry, 1 column 10, 2 columns 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 28 shaded in. Maybe some of you could have figured out, well, in this third row of 10, there's 2 that are not shaded. So that means there's got to be 8 shaded in. And I get 28 hundredths. And how do I write that as a decimal? 0.28. Okay. All right, now look at this one. Is this one broken into hundreds? No, because there's not a group of both vertical and horizontal lines. This is just my vertical columns. So I know that this is broken into tens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many of those are shaded in? Well, 4 of them are not, so that means that 6 of them are. So my fraction on this model is 6/10. Now, every other one I've done so far when we write it as a decimal has been 100th. This one is a 10th. Now, how many numbers come after the decimal in tenths? Again, you've got your chart to help you out. Tenths only ever has one number after the decimal. So 6/10 as a decimal looks like that, 0.6. Now, you are right, and some of you are thinking, well, if I put 0.60, isn't that the same thing as 6/10? Isn't 60 hundredths and 6/10 the same thing? Yeah, they are, but this fraction is written as a tenth, not as 100. So you can only have one number after the decimal. Okay? All right, let's look at this guy, number 7. So I see it's broken back into hundreds again, so I'm going to do my hundreds. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. So 5 times 5 is 25. Again, if you wanted to count them all, you could certainly do that. All right. You could also, well, we won't get into that. Just find the numerator, what it is. Now, this decimal is broken into hundreds again, so I know I'm going to have 2 numbers after the decimal. So how do I say this fraction? 25 hundredths. How do I write it as a decimal? 25 hundredths. Okay, here's the last one on this page. So when I'm looking at this model, I see that it's broken into hundreds again, all right? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. I know there's 10 up, so this part is 50. Then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, covering this spot. 5 times 5 is 25. So 50 plus 25 means I've got 75 blocks, okay, that are shaded in. This one's 100, so I know I'm going to have 2 numbers after the decimal. So 75 hundredths is actually written 0.75. All right. So that's kind of like the first part to our lesson for today, taking a fraction, saying the fraction out loud, and using what I hear when I say it to write it as a decimal. If I say hundredths, then I know I have 2 numbers after the decimal. If I say it's tenths, I know I'm going to have 1 number after the decimal. All right, that's going to be important to remember for the work you're going to do for me for tonight. Okay, so I'm going to upload this one, and I'll be right back with the next one.